So good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Ellen Southard, and I am working strategically with the Seattle 2030 District, primarily focused on their stormwater programs and water in general. We want to invite folks to participate and give us a shout out in the chat room. Let us know who's here and where you're from. And of course, throughout this session, invite you to submit questions to us. For those of you who aren't completely familiar with the Seattle 2030 District, we're a membership organization consisting of real estate owners, managers, developers, industry professionals, and community stakeholders who support the built environment in downtown Seattle and surrounding neighborhoods. Seattle 2030 District is also part of a larger coalition of districts from across the country. Today's a really important discussion for us in terms of how we can improve project performance within the district in terms of rainwater harvesting and water systems overall, and perhaps some combined systems as well and working at scale. And today's session is actually focused on the Living Building Challenge, which we think is an important tool that's going to align our members with the Seattle 2030's goals of conservation, reducing potable water demand, as well as our goals for reducing stormwater discharge and impacting water quality in Puget Sound. And let's face it, water is just integral to the culture of where we live and an incredible natural resource to protect here. So really, we're talking about protecting the way of life in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm really excited about this group. One of the programs that I think is going to be very meaningful to our members is the new ILFI core system, which is really helping to open doors for entering into the living building programs. Core is their newest standard. You're going to hear more about it from the team. But really what the Living Building Program has done, or ILFI has done, the International Living Future Institute has done, is help people succeed with the Living Building Challenge by creating a rating system that's more flexible, particularly for the types of urban infill we see in our 2030 district. So I think you'll learn a lot today. There is a lot of rich content here. And to be honest with you, we've had to scale back our content quite a bit. We could have spent hours on this workshop. So with that in mind, I also want folks to weigh in the chat room. If you would like to hear more from this group and what specific strategies, that would be helpful because they have volunteered to join us again in a few months. So before we get started, I just want to mention some of the work that 2030 has already done and the tools that we have available. Molly Freed is going to navigate for us. So, and again, just want to mention Seattle 2030 District is really about high performance buildings district-wide and looking at how we dramatically reduce our impacts. So I invite you to visit our website and learn more about our programs. Hopefully there's some potential new members in our community here as well. So next, thanks, Molly. So important reports that we published this year: Harnessing the Rain for Building Performance. Really fascinating content in here and some great content around a competition we ran last year, looking at how we could, again, implement a lot of the 2030 strategies and meeting those goals in existing conditions, as well as new construction. So I invite you to take a look at that. There's some brilliant ideas in there from the competitors. And then we also have produced our 2020 report, and it's a lot about what we've accomplished to date, some of our new goals, and again, celebrating the work of our members. So please do visit those reports. There's a lot of information in there if you're interested in water. Thanks again. And then also a calculator tool. We encourage you to pick a project or two and run it through this calculator. If you need help from me, you can contact me I'm Ellen Southard at Seattle 2030 or at 2030districts.org. You can find us on the website. But this is a tool that was developed in conjunction with Earth Economics, and it's really going to help you establish some new benchmarks for your project. It's a great tool, and we already have, again, some case studies that we can share with you that have been successful using the tool. And with that, I want to invite our panel to start. We are not going to read formal bios. I do want to say, if I were to choose a team to work on in terms of new construction or a retrofit, this is the team I'd want to work with. This is a group of people that I have worked closely with over the years. I have incredible respect for their expertise, and I think that you as well will realize what an important resource the Living Future Institute is to our community, and to changing and really increasing performance and truly changing the built environment across the globe. So with that, I want to invite Kathleen Smith, Molly Freed, both with the Living Future Institute, Colleen Mitchell with Carrera Environmental, and Justin Stamkamp with PAE Engineers to move ahead and share this rich content with you in terms of rainwater harvesting and other issues addressing water in the 2030 Eco District. Thanks so much, team. Kathleen, you're up.
Great. Thank you so much, Ellen. And thank you to the Seattle 2030 District for hosting this panel and for inviting the four of us to participate. So we wanted to start today with a brief introduction to the International Living Future Institute, ILFI, and our programs. We are a nonprofit organization that's headquartered here in Seattle with offices and partners around the world. We operate a variety of programs across all scales of the built environment, from materials and products in the manufacturing realm to buildings and all the way up to the community and district scale. We also have a program that supports organizations in meeting some of their goals as sustainability and equity goals. So today we're really going to touch on our oldest and most well-known program, which is the Living Building Challenge, as well as our newest program, which Ellen mentioned, called the Core Green Building Certification Program. Next. So first, I want to explain a little bit about our philosophy. And this is a philosophy that really drives the development of all of our programs. So often when we as a community and society talk about sustainability, what we really focus on is doing less bad, causing less harm. We talk about reducing negative environmental impacts or health impacts or social impacts. But doing less bad isn't inspiring, and it also is not enough. So at the Institute, we ask the question, what does good look like? How can every act of design and construction help to create positive environmental health and social impacts? How can every building make the place where it is, meaning the community and the ecosystem, better? So that's the philosophy behind all of our programs, including, next, the Living Building Challenge, which I mentioned is our oldest program. It's been around for going on 13 years now, and it's evolved over that time in order to further encourage the movement towards regenerative design in the built environment. So next slide. It's organized around 7 different petals, which are sort of categories of impact and influence: place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, and beauty. So you can see just by the name of these categories that it takes a very holistic approach, looking at people and ecosystems and communities and environmental indicators, as well as social and equity indicators. So there are 20 different imperatives that are within these 7 different petals. This program applies to every typology of building and also every scope of construction, whether it's a new building or the renovation of an existing building or tenant fit out of an interior, or even landscape and infrastructure projects such as bridges. You can see from this chart, you know, the 7 different petals down the left-hand column, the 20 different imperatives, and you'll notice that the little green icon indicates which imperatives are core imperatives. And so that means 2 things. One is that it means that regardless of what certification pathway you're pursuing in the Living Building Challenge, Petal or Living, you have to do that imperative. It also indicates the 10 different imperatives that have been pulled out and packaged into a standalone rating system called the Core Green Building Certification Program. Next slide, please. And these 10 imperatives form that Core Green Building Certification Program, which is really designed to identify the 10 critical best practices towards creating a high performance building. It's trying to set a new bar for all construction, becoming, ideally, it's the entry point to regenerative design and becomes the baseline for all construction. So today we're going to be focusing on the water petal and the water imperatives, and really specifically rainwater. And I want to invite Molly now to tell us a little bit about why that's the focus.
Hey, thanks, Kathleen. Hi, everybody. So as Kathleen said, I'm going to be taking a look at rainwater specifically. So why it's important and what we can all gain from harvesting it. And so I'm going to start off by talking about something that I know that we're all super familiar with in Seattle. We talk about it all the time, which is stormwater. But I really think it's worth grounding ourselves in this main issue that's presented to us by rainwater, which is that fundamentally our infrastructure is not really set up to adequately manage it right now. You know, back when the city of Seattle was just one big forest, all of the rainwater that we received was infiltrated into the groundwater, or it was evapotranspirated from all of the soil and plants that really made up the city. Instead, now kind of one of 2 things happens. It either runs over all of the pavement that now makes up our city, picking up all these toxins and pollutants and pulling them into our water bodies, which, as we've seen, causes kind of irreparable harm to our local keystone species. Or alternatively, it enters the sewage system and during these big rain events, overwhelms the treatment plant, which results in combined sewer overflow events. And this happens 200 to 300 times per year in our city and amounts to about 600 million gallons of untreated stormwater mixed with some raw sewage being released into our water bodies. So that is one problem. Another problem is that our infrastructure, so the pipes that carry this water, the pumps that pump the water, they're all aging. They've been built over the last 100 years. They're made of all sorts of different materials. For example, the ones in Pioneer Square are made of wood, and so you really can't expect those to last very long. And the process of upgrading and replacing these pipes is going to be really expensive, especially since the cost of labor has really exponentially increased since the pipes were originally installed, and there are all kinds of additional utilities and stuff going on underground now that have to be really carefully avoided. So in general, the less we use these and rely on these centralized systems, the longer they're going to last, which should be kind of its own incentive to investigate on-site water reuse. But when and as they do need to get replaced, how are we going to fund it? So yes, through ratepayers, partially. So utilities have to pass these costs somewhere, and they will end up partly being paid for by customers. So for context, a family of 4 in Seattle already pays the highest water utility bills in the nation, more than a family in Atlanta, more than a family in any city in California, and almost 6 times as much as a family in Phoenix. So these rates are only going to increase as the costs to replace infrastructure increase. And Seattle is one of the few cities in the country that charges a stormwater fee as well. And I think that's really important to highlight because the cool thing about rainwater harvesting is that it not only reduces your potable water bill, it also reduces your stormwater bill, all with one investment. And on that note, I'm now going to kind of shift to talking about the opportunities that are presented by rainwater harvesting. So in general, we want to create kind of a paradigm shift with this presentation. So away from the negative that I just discussed, where rainwater is kind of framed as a problem to be managed, and we want to shift towards a new framework where rainwater is an asset. So along those lines, harvesting rainwater can help you access some additional incentives. Most notably, I think the Living Building and Seattle 2030 pilot program in the city of Seattle. And I'm not sure how many people in this webinar are familiar with this program, but on our end, it's created kind of a huge boom in registrations because the incentives are just so great. As you can see here, 25% additional density, additional height for residential and commercial buildings, and you also get a little bit of hand-holding on the permit side, and design departures for features that you need to include in order to meet the requirements. And the requirements are here. So in order to access this, awesome incentive program, you need to meet one of these requirements, depending on if you're new construction or renovation. There's a lot of like nitty-gritty subtleties here. This is kind of not entirely accurate, but you can email me after this is over if you have any questions. But kind of suffice to say, you need to be harvesting rainwater if you want to qualify for either of these pathways. So if you're a new building, you either have to use only non-potable for non-potable demand, or you have to supply all of your water needs through on-site supplies. So you obviously have to be harvesting rainwater to do that. And renovations have to reduce their potable water use and stormwater runoff by 50%. And remember, the strategy that I just outlined that does both of those things is rainwater harvesting. So to wrap up, rainwater harvesting offers all kinds of benefits to building owners and developers. It reduces the number of combined sewer overflows that we experience, which improves the health of our watershed, like Ellen was talking about at the beginning. It reduces the risk, the water bill risk in the future. So as potable water and stormwater utility fees increase, it also allows you to access some of the most generous building incentives that the city offers. So as you start exploring on-site water reuse, you'll find there's a lot of potential for value in other types of reuse that are a little bit outside the scope of this presentation. But I know that Justin loves talking about nutrient recovery for gray water, wastewater, and there's also the future potential of selling excess non-potable water to other customers or back to the utility. But as a whole other presentation. So I'm going to toss it back to Kathleen to talk about how rainwater harvesting fits in with our certification programs.
Great. Thank you so much, Molly. That was a great overview. So now with that grounding in why this is so critically important and some of the benefits that come to the community and to the ecosystem and to budgets with rainwater harvesting, let's dive in a bit more to the goals and the strategies. So I showed earlier that the Living Building Challenge has 7 different petals, one of which is water. So let's take a look at the 2 different imperatives that are included in the water petal. And just overall, both of these imperatives are really grounded in this particular intent, which does align quite well with both the Living Building Pilot Program goals that Molly just mentioned, as well as the Seattle 2030 District goals around rainwater, stormwater, water reduction. So the idea here is to really realign how water is valued and to redefine wastewater as a resource. So we don't want to think of rain as a liability that needs to be managed, but rather an asset that can be harvested. And we want to create buildings that really work within the carrying capacity and health of the watershed and actually become part of that watershed. And that includes systems that are designed appropriately to the scale and that work harmoniously and appropriately with, you know, on-site resources and systems as well as district scaled systems. Next. So the requirements of the imperative, the requirements of the imperative are cover a variety of different aspects, one of which is to reduce water use. So, and the requirements here around water use reduction are actually very well aligned with the 2030 district. So it's to reduce water use in new construction by 50%. And to reduce water use in existing buildings by 30%. There's also requirements with regards to using the appropriately treated water for the appropriate location. In part, that means not using any potable water for irrigation. And there's requirements around stormwater management on site and not contributing to those combined sewer overflows, which Molly mentioned. Next slide. Yeah, you can go to the next slide now. Yeah, so when we talk about water use reduction, we need to focus on, well, what's the baseline? And that baseline varies by building type. It's calculated per occupant. We created the baseline from a lot of different sources, including the 2030 district baseline. And it does remain iterative over time as better data becomes available about how much water we're actually using within buildings. Next. And I mentioned that there, along with the Seattle Living Building Pilot Program, there's a requirement to not use any potable water for irrigation purposes. We don't need drinking quality water to water our plants and to irrigate the landscape. So let's save that drinking quality water for what we actually need it for. And this is a great opportunity for using rainwater as well as other on-site treated water. Next slide. And it also looks at how do we manage our stormwater and treat our stormwater on site. And if we do need to release it, making sure that it's as clean as possible before it travels on to its next destination. And so this is an image from the Watershed Project, which is in Fremont. And it really is exemplary of how rainwater can become an asset. They're treating and managing on site all the rainwater that falls. They're also going beyond the project boundary and treating the rainwater off of the bridge that's overhead there. So becoming an excellent steward in their community and in the watershed, while also creating this really beautiful public amenity. And I'm going to hand it over to Colleen now to talk about another way to reuse rainwater.
Great, thanks, Kathleen. It's a great example of how a new construction project can manage their stormwater on site and go beyond their project boundary as well. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about how these systems can look in an existing building. You know, a lot of the issues that we're having right now with water quality and combined sewer overflows are due to existing conditions, right? Not due to new development that hasn't happened yet. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about how we can address these concerns in existing buildings. So talk a little bit about the Sheraton. This is 6th and Pike within the district. And this is an analysis we did in 2015. Next. And we evaluated collecting rainwater from the tower roof, not the whole block, but just from the tower roof itself, so about 18,000 square feet, and to reuse that rainwater for use in their cold water laundry. So one way of simplifying the system is that we're only using it in the cold water laundry, and we don't need to worry about redundant water heating systems and things like that. So we can really keep that non-potable water separate. And because of the area of the collection area, because of the large collection area, as well as the high daily demand for the on-site laundry facility, it really kept the storage volume low. We were able to store just over 3,000 gallons, and that resulted in an annual savings of 255,000 gallons of potable water that would have been used within the building for laundry purposes each year. And one thing I wanted to point out about this, because it had such a large collection area and a high daily non-potable water demand, you know, it really had a pretty short payback time for some of these water systems. You know, some systems see quite a long payback time, but an ROI of 7 years is pretty great. Next. And just how it fits within the existing building. You know, there's existing rain leaders coming down from that tower roof. We're able to intercept those with a screen pre-filter to send clean harvested rainwater into a series of tanks at the laundry level beneath the parking. So this really fit into the existing building there. The tanks that we selected are these Bushman slimline tanks that fit through doorways. So they're easy to get up and down elevators. We have multiple tanks in case there's need to replace one. We can isolate the tanks. We've got some redundancy there. And so thinking through those details, especially for a retrofit, is really critical. And from those tanks, you know, it's really a simple little transfer pump to transfer that rainwater over to their laundry system. And, you know, that was meeting the goals of the Seattle 2030 district in 2015. So it was really great to see the stormwater reduction, the reduction in the contributions to flows that may contribute to combined sewer overflows, and really reducing that potable water demand by a significant amount.
Awesome. Thank you, Colleen. And I think that is a fantastic example of a project team that really embraced the opportunities that were presented by Rainwater. But if you're a building owner or a developer that really wants to kind of step up to the next level, our water puddle certification or full living certification is the next step in rainwater harvesting. And in order to do that, you're going to need to meet imperative 6, which is net positive water. So in order to meet this imperative, you have to supply 100% of your water demands, both potable and non-potable, through water that you capture or that's available on site. And so for most of our project teams, that means that they harvest rainwater for potable use, and they reuse their gray or black water for non-potable use. That's like a very generalized statement. But there are some other requirements about wastewater management, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip over them to stay really focused on rainwater harvesting. But the main note I want to make here is that basically the buildings that we have that do pursue this pathway aren't supposed to be, you know, unnecessarily off-grid or islanded. They are really supposed to supplement and enhance the centralized systems, like what I was talking about earlier, you know, by extending the useful life of this infrastructure so that it's not overburdened, especially as our city increases or, you know, experiences the exponential growth that we have been experiencing. So in general, water puddle buildings are designed to increase the resiliency and the flexibility of the existing centralized systems. And I think I'm gonna pass off to Colleen so that she can kind of show, not tell us about some examples of some local projects that are in the process of pursuing one or both of the imperatives that we just discussed.
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that's still on the boards. It's a project we're working with the Port of Seattle. And just want to reiterate, this is still sort of in process, things they're considering, but things we're moving forward with. And this is a project at Fisherman's Terminal where the port is redeveloping 2 areas of that campus there, just west of the Ballard Bridge on Salmon Bay. Oh. Yeah, so the first project that they are working on is called the Gateway Building. And for this project, they are currently considering core green building certification. So as a reminder, core requires that no potable water be used for irrigation and that we have an overall water use reduction from the baseline of 50%. So the strategies for this building will be rainwater harvesting. Oh, you can go the other way, yeah. And so in addition to a mass timber structure and meeting the Seattle 2030 district's energy requirements, we're also showing rainwater harvesting for non-potable uses. Next. Right, so we're considering collecting rainwater from 4 of the building's roofs. We'll be collecting in 2 smaller cisterns on the north and 1 large cistern to the south. This rainwater is proposed to be used for toilet flushing, urinal flushing, as well as irrigation. And just want to point out, so the landscape area for this building is roughly 20,000 square feet, and with all of the internal toilet flushing and the exterior irrigation, we have a total storage volume of about 80,000 gallons. And I'll contrast that with the next building that we're talking about here. So the other building that they are redeveloping on site is the Maritime Innovation Center, or the MINC. And I really like to think about this building, you know, the port sees this as an opportunity to foster innovation in the maritime industry, new technologies, new ways of doing things, new processes, things like that. So it's been fun to think about this building and its function more as a boat. You know, boats need to be able to be self-sufficient. They need to be able to produce their own water and manage their own waste when they're out at sea. And so it's been fun to think through this building in a similar way. So this building is pursuing Living Building Challenge, the full Living Building Challenge. So in addition to meeting the full red list and net positive energy, they're also targeting net positive water. So talk a little bit more about the strategies to get us there. This diagram is showing that we will be collecting rainwater from the roof. We'll be doing that and treating it to potable standards for use inside the building. We will also be collecting the gray and black water produced within the building and treating that for on-site reuse as well. So we'll be reusing that for irrigation outdoors, as well as toilet and urinal flushing inside. And one thing I wanted to point out, you know, we talked about the storage volume for the Gateway building being quite large, and due largely to the irrigation demand, needing to store water for use at a time when it's not raining. Whereas this building, if they're reusing their gray and black water on site, you know, we produce gray and black water every day, so it's a lesser storage volume is needed in order to meet those irrigation demands during the summer. So we evaluated this building. If we were to harvest rainwater for all uses, including irrigation, we would have needed storage of about 48 to 50,000 gallons. Whereas, you know, using it only for potable uses and reusing our gray and black water on site for non-potable uses, that reduced our storage volume down to about 14,000 gallons. So significant reduction in order to reuse those other water sources that are produced every day. And just a little bit more about the stormwater runoff from the paved areas will drain back to a bioretention cell before being discharged to Salmon Bay, just to the north. And just a little bit about permitting. I'll go through this quickly, but rainwater for non-potable uses. Fortunately, King County and Seattle Plumbing have a good program in place to permit these systems for non-potable reuse. So either for irrigation or using interior for laundry, toilet flushing, urinal flushing, cooling towers, things like that. We've got some good standards to follow there. Following the plumbing code. And if you want to treat your water for potable uses in commercial or multifamily buildings, that really would categorize as a Group A public water system and need to be permitted through the State Department of Health. SPU serves this area as a Group A public water system, so you'd also have to do some coordination with the utility to allow another public water system within their service area. So it is a little bit more of a commitment to be that utility and to be that provider for potable water. And permitting for gray and black water, I want to give a shout out to Mark Jager, who's on the line today. He and others in the state have been working on a National Blue Ribbon Commission for non-potable water reuse. And we are currently discussing options for a pilot program to develop these rules for on-site non-potable reuse within Washington State. So we're hoping to use the risk-based framework that was developed as a part of the Blue Ribbon Commission as guidance and a way to create a program within the state to see these systems be successful. And with that, I will hand it to Justin to talk about some of the lessons learned and considerations in his projects.
Thanks, Colleen. So in late 2009, early 2010, the recession was a definition over, but we were still feeling it in the AEC industry. And I was relatively new to PAE. I'd been there less than 2 years. And I had an opening in my schedule, and Paul Schwer, who's the president of PAE, came to my desk. He was very excited, said he had a project that he wanted me to work on. It was going to produce all its own energy, make all its own potable water, and manage all of its own waste on site. And it's great, you're worried about being able to still have a job. And I get to work on a project that kind of is the definition of why I landed at PAE. So I had a great opportunity to kind of share my appreciation and excitement about being able to work on a project like that. And instead, I squandered it with kind of a smart-ass comment, said, "Oh, you mean like a submarine?" So the point Colleen made earlier, boats have to manage all their own stuff. And my background in engineering started on submarines, and I worked in the engineering department. And we had to produce our own energy, make our own water, and manage our own waste. And I interacted with those systems for, the better part of 6 years. And I naively didn't think that making potable water from rainwater would be that difficult. So it was a great place to start, and I've learned a ton from working on that project since then. That project was Bullet Center, and I was able to work with Colleen on that one. And I think we both learned a lot on that project, and it was fun. And I want to talk about, 10 years and what will probably be the rest of my career, learning lessons around water and how to apply those systems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Bullet, talk a little bit about my why. You can go ahead and go to that next slide, Molly. A little bit about program, how program influences decisions, how maintenance and scale influence decisions, and then talk about how we've applied lessons learned in our Portland, or our PAE living building, which is currently under construction in Portland. So I'll start with a quick overview of the Bullet Center. Rainwater treatment system for potable. Rainwater hits the PV array and then makes its way to the membrane roof, goes down to about a 55,000 gallon cistern, goes through a treatment system, goes to all the potable water fixtures in the building. That makes its way to a gray water storage tank in the basement. I assume that they weren't talking to me. Sorry, goes from the gray water storage tank up to a constructed wetland outside the 3rd floor. There's a little pump in that recirculates it, treats it, and it makes its way down to, for lack of a better term, a drain field, and its way back into the natural hydrological cycle. And then we manage nutrients at the building with a foam flush toilet system that goes to 10 Phoenix composters in the basement with an aerobic composting system. So if you go to the next slide, there's a picture of, kind of a close-up picture of what the rainwater system looks like at Bullet. There's on the left, so there's the storage tank, which is 500 gallons, and then to the left of that is the rainwater system as it was built. It's a little bit more complicated than the initial design, which was just done by Colleen and colleagues at 2020 Engineering, but originally just had a couple of simple filters in UV, very elegant, simple system. We had a peer review during construction, which, if it's not obvious, that's an inconvenient time to have a peer review. And there was a couple of other technologies and some recent testing about orientation of filters. So we had kind of generally five different opinions. Colleen and I talked afterwards, and we came up with a sketch to implement all 5 of them with just some extra valves and some piping, and that's what ended up being installed. And we thought, hey, we got 5 systems we can test. Surely we can get one of them permitted. That was an incorrect assumption. We weren't able to get them permitted because we didn't have chlorine. So, we learned a lot about the system, just some general things. Since then, we needed more storage, and that's incorporated in the new version of the challenge. You can't continuously make water and get the permit. You have to make it in one shot, do all the testing and store it. So having that extra storage helps reduce costs. PV array has some ratings that it needs to meet the NSF requirements. And at Bullet, it took us about 5 years to get the permit, but we're now drinking rainwater in the building, which is pretty interesting to see. Another big area where we learned some lessons was around the composting toilet system. This is a picture of what is essentially a prototype foam flush toilet that was installed in the building to go to the composters. We've learned a lot around this too. I was a tenant in the building and have been working with the foundation on various things for a while. And I'm going to come back to the lessons learned on the composting toilet system, specifically to the technical piece, and how we've applied those lessons to the Portland Living building that's currently under construction. And for those of you that haven't seen the New York Times article, the composting toilet system's coming out of Bullet, and I'll touch on some of the technical aspects of why that's happening. But for me, a big mover was, particularly with the Bullet Center and working on that project, really shifted my thinking. And I was exposed through a book that's very technically and comedically rich, the Humanure Handbook, to this idea of how our nutrient cycles are broken and how we need to restore those nutrient cycles, and which is shown on the next slide. And this was my introduction to permaculture and ecology-focused design, which has kind of become my obsession a little bit, mostly healthy obsession, and my thinking about water systems in general. So I want to touch on kind of why I think water is so important before I go into some of the lessons learned, because I still think it's critical and it's one of my primary interests in my career. So I started with talking about the water cycle, which is on the next slide. And some of the text is missing. Anyway, so the key takeaways from this for me is that, there's different ways to store water in ecosystems and in the watershed. There's different ways to treat water, whether it's in the soil or through plants or trees. But the big one here that I want to focus on for today is that the water system, the water cycle in functional watersheds and functional ecology is driven by energy from the sun. So there's a water energy nexus that's inherent to functional ecology, and I think that's a really critical piece. And that nexus drives the carbon cycle. So the carbon cycle is kind of shown on the next page, and the way I look at that is kind of two sections. There's an atmospheric carbon cycle, which is the one we're worried about related to climate change and global warming, and then there's a soil-based carbon cycle. And energy and really water is the connection between those, and it's what drives functional ecosystems. Functional ecosystems have the ability to mitigate climate extremes and also sequester carbon. So the next slide has just a real simple graphic, this idea of energy transactions of trees, and that includes water, but just this idea that functional ecosystems sequester carbon. And kind of where my thinking is headed right now and why I think water is so important is I think right now where we're at, it's more important than energy when it comes to climate change, because it connects the atmospheric side to the living system side. That's the ability to sequester it. So that water is the primary nutrient, and it's the driver, and thinking about it in that watershed context, I think is important. So that's kind of provided the background for kind of my current thinking, and I fall back to that when I get stuck. And one of the places I got stuck, this is around 2015, had to do with program. And we were working on the project, the Stadium East, which is a 1.2 million square foot development, which you can see an early concept picture of on the next slide. And they were pursuing the older version of the pilot program, and the owner really wanted to do the water pedal, which is great because it wasn't common. Normally it was energy or materials. And this is an area that I'm really interested in, so I was super excited. We started doing the analysis, and this was mixed use, mostly office with retail and restaurants on the base floor. And we started looking at the office analysis and how we could get to net zero water and net positive water now. And the next slide shows the kind of how that would work. And we could get there for the office building. And then we overlaid it with retail and restaurants. So just for a little bit of context, an office building might use 10 to 15 gallons per square foot per year, and a restaurant might use 100 to 300 gallons per square foot per year. So the red here shows kind of the low end of restaurants and retail, and the pink shows what the high end might be. And the takeaway from this is that less than 10% of the building program would use between 2 to 5 times more water than the other 90% of the building. I didn't know how to solve this problem. So, but I thought that it fit within the philosophy of ILFI that Kathleen mentioned. So we were neighbors. She was on the floor below us, 2 floors below us, called Kathleen, presented this project to her, said, you know, I'm not sure what to do. I think this is important. It fits within what you guys are doing, but I don't know how to get the owner there. And she presented and kind of introduced this idea to me of scale jumping. So, well, can you capture water from other roofs? Like, okay, that's a really interesting idea. Fits within an ecosystem framework. So we went and looked at that. And on the next slide shows what we would have to do for the project to do that. We'd have to capture about 1 million square feet of roof area, including the nearby stadiums. That was going to be very difficult to make a case for that. So I have to call Kathleen again. She says, well, what about rainwater? So, or groundwater. So we looked at groundwater, went and looked at the environmental report, and there was an interesting list of chemicals on that, which is shown on the next slide. And, you know, so back I go to Kathleen again, say, hey, this is what we found. There's technically a way probably to solve this, but I don't think it's appropriate for a commercial owner. And we were kind of stuck. So we started looking at it and thinking about it a little bit more. And the next slide shows kind of a typical building, right? Where we have about 40 million going to a combined sanitary system, and the water system's completely separate. And if we want to do less bad and reduce water use, we can do that. We can get it down to about 15 million, which kind of shows the next slide just through efficient fixtures and things like that. You go to the next slide, Molly. Yeah, so this shows the less bad option with about a 50% reduction. And then the next slide shows kind of how we started thinking about it. So there's a lot on this slide, but the basic gist is that we were going to treat, a recommendation to the owner was to treat all the gray and black water, reuse it for non-potable uses in the building, have a rainwater to potable system to serve the potable uses. But we still needed more water than we could use. And this is when we started kind of talking about the district options, which there's a more simplified version on the next slide that we can look at, where if we reuse the building, we could get down the excess of what we needed down to 4.3 million. And we had an idea of basically trying to create a hub for a future purple pipe system that would provide reclaimed water to the neighboring buildings. This is where I was first introduced by Kathleen to the idea of hand printing, and where you can't meet the explicit requirements. If you can make it easier for other people to do it, there becomes some opportunities there. Big learning opportunity for me, learned a ton, started thinking a lot more about scale and program and the importance of all of that. Unfortunately, this part of the project didn't go forward, but it helped influence and gave me a platform for the kind of the next area where my thinking started to change a little bit, which was around water and scale and the maintenance impact. So we're doing a lot of work right now out at the University of Washington, and they have a new green building standard requirement, which should be the next, summarized on the next slide. LEED Gold, 15% better than energy code, and 50% water savings. You know, all these are reasonably challenging now, and kind of our analysis of the 50% better than code for water use in the building is for classroom and office buildings is you need to do rainwater systems. So we proposed that, and we got a surprising amount of pushback from the facilities group. And we started, and the systems are relatively simple when they're just used for non-potable, a couple of filters and some pumps. And we started to try to unpack that a little bit more. And what we learned is that, you know, as an institution, they have, I think the last number we heard was it was a $2 billion deferred maintenance backlog. That's a hard number for me to understand what that even means. But it was great for us and great for me because it started making me more aware of the maintenance impacts on these projects. So we started looking at that, and the next slide kind of shows if we just implemented a rainwater system in every building, what that might look like. So there's systems scattered everywhere. There's carbon and energy associated with going to maintain all of those, and you have a district. Can you do more nodal or district systems and reduce that maintenance? And still achieve the same water savings in the long run. And this was just a real rough sketch of that. And basically what our recommendations to clients that are looking at district systems is their minimum would be to put in a purple pipe system. So they're kind of creating the conditions for awesome to happen, so to speak. And you may not get that water savings on day one, but 10 years down the road, you might have a drastic reduction in your water use. And we think there might be some interesting finance opportunities that come from this to be able to use water and nutrients as a resource. So that was a big learning piece for us as well. Can you go to the next slide? So that spans about 7 years of time for us. We had several other projects that we could talk about that we've worked on, but we embarked on our own living building project, which is very similar to Bullet, but it's a true developer-led project. It's currently under construction, and we're PAE is one of the investors in the property, and we've applied the lessons learned over the last 10 years onto that. So I'll do a quick overview of the systems on that and touch a little bit on some of the lessons around the composting toilet system in Bullet, because I'm assuming people will have questions. So very, very similar system. We capture the rainwater from the roof. It goes to a cistern. It's pumped into and treated into the storage tank and feeds all the fixtures in the building. It goes to a gray water treatment system. And it's the Portland Living Building. The gray water is treated and reused in the building, and it's reused in vacuum flush toilets, a vacuum flush toilet system, and then those nutrients are captured in a common spot, and then they're delivered to a composting toilet system and managed that way. We also have a home run pipe for a urine collection system, and that urine collection system will have a new product that Pete Munoz and Biohabitats have been working on, where it treats urine to a commercial scale agricultural fertilizer. So most of the nutrients that we deposit into these systems are in the urine. So a couple of the lessons learned, one of the things that we learned on Bullet was that the foam flush toilets weren't super popular with the tenants, and they had some maintenance problems associated with them. We didn't have enough tanks in Bullet, and we didn't have the ability to evenly load them. So in our building, we put in the vacuum flush toilets. It uses significantly less water than a flush fixture, but more than a foam flush toilet. It allows us to centrally collect it and then distribute it evenly to the tanks. We put a backup system in, so if something ever goes wrong with it, we can pump directly to sanitary. We had the more tanks and then the urine diversion system. So it's great that we learned a lot of lessons from Bullet that we were able to apply to this project, and we're happy to see it moving forward the way it is. And depending on the building type and the owner, we might recommend composting toilets. We might recommend more centralized water systems, and we are still doing lots of rainwater for non-potable flushing. So there's lots of opportunity there. So just wrapping it up and trying to come back to the system. This is one of the things when I was trying to convince myself that we should try to figure out how to get Stadium East to move forward, is this idea of ecosystem succession. And when you're starting from a degraded landscape, sometimes you have to do things that aren't ideal, but you're creating, again, those conditions for awesome to happen so you can move it forward. And just wanted to share the lessons that I've learned and kind of the evolution of my thinking with everybody as a way to see what questions people might have. That's all I've got.
Thank you all so much. That was a wonderful presentation from everybody. I learned a lot, and I am wondering, I don't see any questions right now in the chat room. I want to invite people, if they do have questions, please submit them in the chat room because we still have a few minutes left. And then I also want to note that Ann Enomoto from the Seattle 2030 District uploaded links to some of the 2030 District tools that we talked about earlier. I think one question I have for the group, just in relationship to our district, is where parking is down. So the need for parking is down substantially in South Lake Union. Given the demographics there, that particular community is way overbuilt in terms of parking. And so I'm wondering have any of you worked on any projects where we're converting parking to storage for rainwater?
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, that was something that we considered with the shares and really just understanding what space is available. I mean, oftentimes when we're approaching a new construction project, we think about the carrying capacity of a site and what uses can be supported by the rainfall on a particular site. But certainly with existing buildings and retrofits, we want to think about what space is available, how are the existing systems plumbed, things like that. So working within those constraints and kind of working backwards to figure out what's the best benefit there, and how what goals can you meet with the space available. And I think that really, shows us that using the rainwater, reusing the rainwater when it falls in the wintertime is really the most efficient way of rainwater harvesting, rather than trying to store that water over the summer when it may not be raining, which may have more of a water conservation benefit, but really from a stormwater perspective, using that rainwater during the rainy season is hugely beneficial.
Great, thanks, Colleen. We have a question for Justin, and that is, Justin, how do you operationalize purple pipes in existing buildings and in existing communities?
That's a great question. A complicated one to answer, but I have a few ideas on it. So I think putting a good model to look at would be San Francisco. So they had a requirement of putting purple pipe in a lot of their buildings with the anticipation of a future district system. Kind of depending, like kind of institutional client, like the University of Washington, we're recommending putting that in. You can separately meter it, pipe it with a couple extra valves and some caps so you can connect to a future system in the future. And then that centralizes, it reduces the maintenance and how much you need to travel to do that. I think in a more commercial context, you could do a similar thing. So you could put purple pipe in every building, have it set up where you could meter it, and then you could potentially have a central system somewhere. Tom Putman, we've worked with him on a few concept packages for that, where there's some finance models where you can get either third-party financing or owner-operated systems where you can have either Blackwater and Graywater or just rainwater systems, treat that and distribute it out as a small central utility. He's really good at communicating the finance side of that, and then you can start to build that out. So it becomes a resource and a potential revenue generation source for somebody if we can figure out a way to do that. And then there's potentially ways that you could do kind of a nodal or a more network system where it provides some more resilience to the existing system where you can connect future buildings. The challenge with those systems, whether it's on the energy or the water side, is getting that first hookup and that first connection, and having a future plan that you can make the finances work. But that's a couple of ideas of how you would operationalize that moving forward. I think there's an opportunity there for the 2030 district to do something like that. That might be get the process started sooner. It's just finding the right hub for your first kind of neighborhood system. Great,
thanks, Justin. So I think we have time for one more question. I'm sorry we can't answer all of them, but we have a question from Matt Krieger. What was the process like getting permitted for a portable water supply becoming a public utility? So let's try and answer that in about a minute. Who wants to take that one?
I can take that one, sure. So yeah, becoming a public water supply, like I mentioned before, it's a Group A public water system through the State Department of Health. That is the same type of permit that Seattle Public Utilities has. Granted, it's certainly a smaller system, but still needs to provide the same level of safeguard for public health. And so, starting with an agreement with the existing service provider, SPU, to allow another public water system within their service area. So that's fortunately something that they've been willing to work with us on. And then from there, really developing that water system plan. We need to be showing how we're protecting our watershed, which is our roof, how we are providing at least as good or better level of service than the public water system does. So thinking about how we're building in that resiliency into the system, what happens during maintenance, those sorts of things, and really providing the assurances that the system has the components necessary to be successful long term. Need a certified operator to be able to test and maintain the system components and make sure that the water quality is adequate. So it is a bit of a challenge, and the way that our current regulations are written, it's really putting the onus on the applicant to show sort of why and how this system does meet those community needs, or meet the building needs, as well as or better than the public system. So I think that's something that you want to work with the agencies very early on, and as Justin said, not necessarily diving into design before you're creating those relationships with the permitting agencies. Chlorine was something we were trying to avoid, as it's a red listed component in the Living Building Challenge, and we also know some of the human and environmental health concerns around it. But ultimately, rainwater is considered a surface water, and federal regulations do require chlorination for surface waters in public water supplies. So at the end, there was a component that needed to be added for the chlorination piece. So that was something that came after main construction of the building was complete. But just like every other water system, you've got a 6-year water system plan that you need to update. You have an annual operating permit, things like that. But from a day-to-day, there is a certified operator that helps, make sure the system is working as needed. But it's not a full-time 40-hour-a-week position necessarily. It's an operator that could potentially operate several buildings within an area. So I think as these systems become more prevalent, they'll be more affordable to maintain, and there'll be a network of experts who can operate these facilities in neighborhood and campus areas. Yeah.
Thanks, Colleen. So I see the bulk of our audience has stayed. I'm going to squeeze in one more question from Aaron Clark. The question is, there's multiple benefits apparent to each of these examples. Do you have thoughts on the 2 or 3 benefits that seem to influence developers and landowners the most?
I'll try to answer that one. I think this isn't answering the question directly, but I think it's important to point out one of the things that we run into is just the finance piece and the first cost of some of these systems. And in developer-led projects, there's not necessarily a way to capture the savings, because that gets passed on to the tenant. So one of the hurdles we run into is just the finances and the first cost, and then how that savings gets passed to the owner. Where we've had the most developers that are mission driven, like they have to have a mission and stick to a goal to be successful on these projects, and that's the way it is. But there is a way to do it and meet financial metrics. We were able to do it in our building in Portland. I don't know if that answers the question. I don't know if I can answer it any better. It really depends on the owner. I don't know if Colleen or Kathleen or Molly has anything to add to that.
I was just going to mention, if there happens to be, a singular or just a couple of large non-potable water demands, for example, a large laundry demand or a large wash down non-potable water demand, a cooling tower, something like that, the costs and the complexity can be much less if you're really just harvesting the rainwater to be reused for that one purpose, and certainly retrofitting piping if it's an existing building, things like that. It really simplifies things, and can have a really big benefit if it's one large demand. So I can see that being a compelling reason, similar to the Sheridan example, or others that just it simplifies the complexity. And looking at Rachel Meyer's question as well, you know, seeing multifamily buildings with a central laundry facility, or, you know, campuses that have locker rooms where they have one, you know, restroom facility, or things like that, where you can sort of focus on one area of the building, seems to be where folks are concentrating when they can.
Great, thanks so much. Molly, can you flip to my last slide? So or the one before that, actually, thanks. So again, just want to thank everyone that joined us this morning. I do want to mention that our next water session will be in November. ILFI will be back to share some other tools, as will Earth Economics. And then we will probably look to early in the year to have continuing discussions about how LDC is the right tools for our landowners in the district. In the meantime, I just want to call attention, our Vision Awards this year is online. It's 2020 Reimagined, October 15th. It's a virtual event, but it's also a complimentary event. And so we are encouraging folks to join us this year that might not normally can. And I think it's going to be really exciting. We're going to have a great panel that you will hear about soon. Go ahead and you can flip that slide. And we'll be announcing our awards soon. But in the meantime, just want to mention that our keynote is Jamie Margolin, and she is one of the co-founders of the 0 Hour. Some of you who were at the 2019 Living Future Unconference heard Jamie. She is a dynamo, and of course, you know, our future is now, and hearing from youth is an important aspect in terms of listening to stakeholders. So we're excited to have Jamie on board, but also just really want to encourage all the folks that are practitioners out there, please bring your younger staff that you're mentoring to this event. It's a great opportunity to hear from, again, some future leaders, but also just to engage with the Seattle 2030 district at a complimentary level. It's a rare occasion that our Vision Awards is complimentary, and we hope you take advantage of joining us on October 15th. So thank you to everyone. What an exquisite panel. Virtual applause. And again, this is a great group of people to work with. I hope you keep in touch with them. If folks need more information, feel free to write to me at ellen.southard@2030districts.org. And Ann Enomoto from our team will be posting an update of this, and the video will be available soon. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great day, and we appreciate you being here. Thanks, panel.